I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. The call for term limits is a voter favorite, firmly within the I Hate Politics zeitgeist. There is something satisfying about the idea of a clean slate. But of course, the metaphor doesn't really apply to history itself. There is little doubt that a handful of leaders can and do capture power and hold it sometimes to the detriment of the larger public. Elections are the base form of term limits. But advocates argue that new candidates and better ideas are stymied by incumbents who have big advantages in name recognition, using the power of their office, and campaign spending. George Washington is often evoked in this argument for leaving office after 2 terms as president and setting the informal rule. But legal term limits only came 150 years later, following FDR's 4th term, during which he died. Since then, legally mandated term limits have spread to states and local governments. In 2016, Montgomery County got its first term limit rule thanks to the work of the forever Republican candidate and famous basketball heckler, Robin Ficker, who pushed through a ballot question, a referendum, limiting council members and the county executive to 3 consecutive terms. This, of course, means a person could serve 3 terms, take a break, and come back to serve another 3 terms. Rinse and repeat. In June 2024, Reardon Sullivan, a local businessman and one-time Republican candidate for county executive, working under the banner of Committee for Better Government, submitted the required 10,000 signatures for a new ballot question for the November 2024 election, cutting the term limit period from 3 to 2 consecutive terms. In this episode, I began a conversation about term limits with Sullivan, but I was not able to finish it. This is only the 3rd time in 3.5 years of the show that a guest has left an interview recording midway. Stay with us to find out why he left. And we will end instead with a breakdown of the discussion in the County Council over term limits and charter amendments.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program, where you'll learn to shape public policy, impact communities, and function at the center of modern society. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society moving, precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Jackie and the Treehorns, who are a Alexandria, Virginia-based alt-rock band. Stephen Rubin and Pam Long on vocals, guitars, and piano. Frank Caputo on bass and synth. And Brian Gibson on the drums. In last Tuesday's news bulletin, June 25th, I made a mistake. I said that the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, which connects Prince George's County in Maryland to Alexandria in Virginia, spanned the Anacostia River. Actually, the river that runs under Wilson Bridge is still the Potomac. Thanks to a listener who wants to remain nameless for pointing it out. We love to hear from you when you like what we do on the show and when you think we have been remiss. It is easy to send us a voice letter, record on your phone, and email the file to producer@ihppod.org. Before we get into my conversation with former Republican County Executive candidate Riordan Sullivan, some basic facts. There are two ways in which a ballot question gets on the ballot in Maryland. You get 10,000 valid signatures in support, or the county council decides to emplace its own ballot question. Changing term limits for elected officials is not just a ballot question, but also requires an amendment of the county charter that prescribes the tenures of elected officials. On questions of charter amendments, the county has a charter review commission that recommends up and down ballot questions involving the charter. The county council is not duty-bound to follow the commission's recommendations, and sometimes the county council's ballot questions can be in conflict with a charter amendment that has 10,000 valid signatures. Riordan Sullivan, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you. I actually love being here.
You've submitted signatures for a county ballot question on reducing the current 3-term limit for the county executive to 2 terms. What is the timeline we are looking at?
The Board of Elections has 20 days from when they get all of the information in our ballot petition to review the 12,139 signatures that we submitted to confirm or reject that they are valid voters in Montgomery County.
When is those 20 days expire?
8th of July.
And what happens after that?
We get a report as to whether or not, or how many of those signatures are considered valid and how far we are going towards that 10,000.
Do you get a few more weeks to fill it up in case you're short?
We do. The final deadline is July 29th, and we are already planning at least one more submission sometime the second or third, probably third week of July, that I think it's probably going to have about 7,000 or 8,000 more signatures.
And what is the county council's timeline?
I believe they're going to vote on it either the second or third Tuesday of July.
Okay. Why are you doing this?
Typically, the executive branch of the government has 2 terms. And so it's like, well, geez, what happens here in Montgomery County? So given that, it's like, we should really work to have 2 terms for the county executive, just like the president. And so the verbiage that we're using when we're talking to people is quite obvious. If 2 terms are good enough for Bill Clinton, for Barack Obama, and Larry Hogan, shouldn't it also be good enough for our county executive?
Are there substantive reasons for doing this? I mean, I understand the analogical reasons for doing it.
That's the reason we're doing it. That's the people want and to have the highest office in the county rotate a little more.
To what end, though?
Whenever you have the highest elected official, just like the president. I mean, or if you remember, George Washington's handed in a sword and said, I don't want to be president. I don't want to be king for life. Because what ends up happening is the highest office, people start, or they start gaining, shall we say, unfair advantage in the goal instead of working towards the citizens, they're just being reelected. And that's the problem. We need to make sure, I think was it Ben Franklin who said something like, guests and fish rot after 3 days? And at some point, the 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 position of county executive tends to get old, where they're not really doing their job. And at some point, especially with technology changing the way it is, it sort of makes sense to have new blood, new ideas that can actually more so relate with the changing demographic here in Montgomery County.
I get George Washington's argument about, president is king and sort of the limits to power. But county executive of Montgomery County hardly seems to be a kingly position, to be honest with you. Seems like a minor nobleman.
I'm not necessarily a fan of the royal hire, but yes, it's the highest elected official in Montgomery County.
Maybe I can ask the question differently. How do you see, specifically related to the county, how do you see the county benefiting in governance terms? Not analogically, not if the president is this, then we should do that. Because, I think presidency is different from the county executive. The president is the most powerful executive in all of the land. The county executive, in fact, is almost co-equal to the council. In some cases, for instance, with land use, which is a significant local issue, the council has more power than the county executive. So it's a different type of position. So by asking for a presidential analogy in this, how do you hope to help improve governance in the county?
Like I've mentioned before, the idea is at some point you need change. 12 years, I asked people, what internet provider did you have 12 years ago? And how has your internet changed? How has technology changed? How has your family and your life changed? In 8 years, if you can't get the job done to meet your vision in 8 years, maybe it's time to let somebody else do.
All right, let's talk about this possible change you speak of. So you're able to disqualify Mark Elrich, say, from running for a third term. Who do you think is going to replace Mark Elrich?
Well, I would be talking out of school if I answered that question. I wouldn't.
You've been out of school for a long time on this, so let's go for it.
Are you saying I'm old? Okay, I got you. I have no idea which Democrat will take over.
Well, my question underneath is how different will they be from Mark Elrich?
I think that you're obviously a student of the county council, and there are people who are more moderate. There are people who are more business friendly. There are people who don't pay their traffic tickets. There's people who propose taking school resource officers out of the schools, and then they find out, oh, guess what? That was a bad idea. So at some point, we need to have the adults come back in the room. I think that there's some people who are considering running on the county council now who I would say are more mature and more of people who I would like to see as adults in the room that are running the county.
So who are your preferences among the Democrats to take over the county?
I'm not going to go on record for that.
Well, the question really is, you are a Republican. The Republican Party has a very small chance of getting close to the county executive's position at this point in Montgomery County. Whoever is going to come in is going to be a Democrat. And that's the change you're seeking. My question is, are you really going to get the change you're seeking?
Well, that'll be for the voters to decide, right?
Everything is for the voters to decide, including the fact that Mark Elrich may run for the third term.
That's also true. Whether he can run for the third term, whether the county council does put up a competing and therefore confusing ballot initiatives, just like they did with the 9D ballot initiative.
So what is interesting here is it isn't now in the county council's hands to determine whether they're going to put forward a competing ballot question to the one that you've put forward. You have said that some folks on the county council right now would make better county executives than Mark Elrich. and you're hoping for that change to come about. If they, in fact, or did you not say that? Am I imagining that?
I would push back and say that there are some people who I think would be good county executives. I did not say anything bad about Mark Elrich. I actually met Mark Elrich, smart guy, and there's a lot of good things. He has a lot of redeeming values.
Right. So we are not talking about people and humans. We are talking about their political positions. So good or bad in reference to their political positions, right? So purely in political terms, you want to change the system that the county has and enable change to happen. Governance changes, policy changes that you hope will happen as a consequence of that. The possibility of whoever is going to replace Mark Elrich as a consequences of your action is going to be another Democrat. That Democrat is probably going to come from the county council.
Unless Madaleno decides to run.
That's a possibility. But, there's a good chance that somebody from the county council will do it. That county council is now responsible for putting forward a competing ballot question to the one that you have. They may have a self-interest in saying, oh, maybe we should disqualify the current county executive. If county council unanimously passes a ballot question, would you still believe that change was possible through the route that you have chosen to take?
And again, it goes back to the voters. When you can put reasonable ballot initiatives on the ballot, and the voters can then decide if they want to accept them or not.
I spoke with Howard Dennis in preparation for this interview.
Howie Dennis, okay.
Yes. He is the lone Republican sitting on the County Charter Review Commission.
Mm-hmm.
And he does not support your ballot question, reducing the number of terms for the county executive from 3 to 2. He says, just like you said a minute ago, elections are in and of themselves term limits.
That's actually not what I said, but I say that the idea is you put ideas on the ballot, and and then you let the voters decide based on what is on the ballot. The most difficult thing will be when the county attorney decides to frame the question based on the county council's suggested or possible recommended ballot amendment. And unfortunately, what I would suspect they're probably going to do is try to reframe it or frame it such that it's overtly confusing to the voters, number one, because they know from 9D, and actually Will Jawando said it during the council meeting, that if both measures pass, that they will both nullify and the status quo stays the same. And so that, if you think about that for a second, if the county council decided to put something up that was complementary, that's one thing. But to be able to unilaterally put a measure on the ballot that is purposely designed to confuse the voters is really in bad faith.
Well, I mean, we'll talk about this in just a minute, but I just want to know that elections are the ultimate term limits. Voters could say, I don't want this guy coming back into office, so let's remove him.
Some people have that view, yes.
Why is that view not correct in your perspective?
I think that if you have a ballot, something on the ballot, then we should be able to put anything we want on the ballot and have the voters decide if they want term limits.
But the county executive is going to be on the ballot and open to rejection by the people of the county.
And I know there's a lot of folks who feel that way, and I just believe it should be different. What we're talking about is changing the county charter. And there's some people who are unfortunately saying that this is a referendum on Mark Elrich. And I say, no, it's a referendum on the county charter. And again, I go back to the original premise. The president has 2 terms. The governor has 2 terms. So shouldn't our county executive, the highest elected official in the county, also have 2 terms?
But they're not comparable.
Well, that's your thought process. We have 12,000 people who specifically view it otherwise. And actually, at the end of the day, I think we're probably going to have 18,000 signatures of people who think it should be on the ballot. So if they have 18,000 people who think they want it to be on the ballot, shouldn't it be on the ballot? Why? I don't know why the pushback is. If people want to put it on the ballot, then let people put it on the ballot. The disingenuous issue is the fact that the county council is now going to throw up a competing, confusing measure on the ballot that is specifically designed to confuse voters.
But what is the benefit of doing that? I'm still not clear.
The benefit for them putting this competing measure up there is
why is the benefit of doing this in the first place, right? There is a process in place to remove the county.
Let's change the topic, because this is something that obviously you feel one way, I feel another way. I have 18,000 people or so who feel that this measure should be on the ballot.
But the county executive has been elected by a large number of people. That is more than 18,000.
Actually, it was probably about 32 votes, if I remember correctly.
32 votes, but he got many more than 18,000 votes.
Yeah, but if you look at the numbers between just the ratio of the choices that were there, I mean, last time there's some people in the county council who did not run. So when they run this time, I think if I remember correctly, David Blair got 40%. Mark Elrich got roughly about 40%, minus 32 votes. And the Hans Riemer got the remaining 20% or something like that.
So is your claim that the current county executive may not represent the will of the people?
I'm saying that the votes are where they were, but I think if we put term limits on the ballot based on, again, here's where you think one way, I'm presenting a different position.
Well, it's not my question. I just want to know what benefits you see coming out of this.
I think it's time for a change. It's time for a change. It allows other people. When David Blair, who put up in 2 elections $12 million of his own money, Mark Elrich ran with, I think, about $1.6 million of public election funding and roughly about $12 million in free advertising as the county executive. And that's the key. If you're the county executive or you're the elected leader, you actually have $12 million, in his case, worth of free advertising.
So I don't know where you get this $12 million number. Are you concerned about incumbency and the effects of incumbency?
Incumbency is a real problem. $12 million came from a blogger, I think his name was Adam Pagnucco. And he actually did the analysis.
I don't know how anybody can come up with that number, but I understand the incumbency advantage that you talk about.
4 years, you get your feet wet. If you can't get your job done in 8 years, that's a problem. The power of incumbency is daunting. Again, I go back to the analogy of how much David Blair spent versus how much Mark Elrich got. And again, whether you call it $12 million, $10 million, or $13 million, that's basically free gravitas as being an incumbent. So is it fair? Is anybody else? I mean, if David Blair can't win, that's kind of ridiculous. I think the power of the incumbency is a problem.
If you're truly concerned about the incumbency effects, then go for 1 term. Why go for 2 terms?
Again, as your background as a reporter, asking questions, I understand your response to the question. But as I've mentioned before, the 2 terms is standard for the highest elected official. I go back to our president. I go back to our governor. And so if it's good enough for the president, it's good enough for the governor of Maryland, then it should be good enough for the county executive.
The president controls the military. The county executive controls
the police.
On 3 matters that are very critical to county governance, right? Land use, capital budget, operating budget. The county council is almost as powerful, or if not more powerful in some cases, than the county executive. It's a very different kind of executive role. in comparing the county executive to a presidency. Are you stretching this?
Interesting. Actually, I have another call I got to get on at, because I wasn't expecting this to be this long. I have another Zoom call I've got to get on in, looks like 3 minutes or something like that. So I've got to jump off. But again, at the end of the day, that's the whole issue of term limits. Again, I go back to, if our president has 2 terms, the governor has 2 terms should be good enough for the county executive. We've submitted 12,000 ballot petitions. We're probably going to end up with 16 to 18,000 at the end of the day. Put it on the ballot and let the voters decide. And the fact that the county council has deemed it or is looking at putting a competing ballot initiative on the ballot to basically confuse and obfuscate the issues, I think that's truly disingenuous that they are going to do that.
But if they disagree with you, they can put a competing ballot question of their own, right?
You say they disagree with me. If you look at the county review commission, Jim Michael's presentation that he did and I was actually there when he did it, they didn't put this issue, their competing ballot initiative, they didn't throw that into the court of the county council until the day I put in the petitions. That was June 13th. As soon as they saw that we were going to hit that magic number of getting over 10,000, they scrambled, and then they said, "Oh, we're going to amend our presentation to the county council." They were supposed to have the Charter Review Commission was supposed to have their report submitted by May 1. They didn't actually consider it until June 13th. They saw that we were going to get the 10,000. Then, somebody said, we need to put a competing ballot initiative on the ballot the same way that they did with 9D. That's disingenuous.
The timeline allows them to do that, right?
There's no question that they can do that. I just find it a very bizarre coincidence that this didn't come up until the day that we handed in the ballot petitions. I'm going to jump off. Okay. Yeah, I didn't, because we chatted for too long.
I'll carry a small excerpt, but my hope was to do a significant interview that would, it would last an hour.
Yeah, I would love to do that, but unfortunately, like I said, I thought we were going to start. My fault, we were late.
But do you want to redo this sometime, or are you not interested in having this conversation?
We can have a conversation later on, but right now I got to go because I'm going to get. This is my day job. I got to do something for my day job.
Good luck.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye.
Because Reardon Sullivan abruptly left the interview, several questions remain unanswered. First, who or what is Committee for Better Government? It is a political committee registered under Maryland law, established by Reardon Sullivan, which in the last reporting period ending June 20th saw a big influx of money, about $100,000 from real estate development companies and their associated entities. Among them, Empower Montgomery, which is a 501c4 nonprofit run by real estate developer Charlie Nelson. Gingery Development Group, another major local real estate firm. Reardon Sullivan himself gave $20,000. Miller and Long Company's Nicholas Paleologos, David Hillman's Southern Management Companies, the Associated Builders and Contractors, and the Apartment and Office Building Association. All this money presumably went to collecting the signatures. Ballot signature collection is a niche area in the election industry. Current Montgomery County Executive Mark Elrich is considered to be anti-development, and he has pushed policies such as rent stabilization and higher taxes in the face of opposition from the real estate industry. The battle lines in this political fight are well known and long understood. The second question that remains unanswered is what will the county council do?
10,000 people in a jurisdiction of 1.1 million, and that is just here in Montgomery County, is not commensurate with the year 2024.
That's County Council member Evan Glass. And now Gabe Albornoz.
In past elections, what has happened is outside firms are hired to secure these signatures. I myself personally have had interactions with people that were aggressive, dishonest, unprofessional, and with the threshold that low, it creates the opportunity for nefarious behavior.
Now, more than ever, a very high number of mail-in ballots. So if the questions are not presented both in however they've landed and in a plain language version, we are bound to have some issues along the way. And I do think it is something that we can do better.
Councilmember Dawn Lutke and Natalie Fanny Gonzalez.
I think it's just so wrong to limit the county executive, regardless of who that person is, regardless of the political party. Having that person serve only 2 terms is wrong.
Third, what might a competing ballot question look like? The answer to this comes from the County Charter Review Commission Chair, Jim Michaels.
But after unanimously deciding to oppose the petition that's being circulated, the Commission went on to consider whether the Charter's current provision on term limits should be reconsidered and refined. And that's because of the way our 3-term limit works. It does not actually prevent somebody from serving more than 3 terms. It actually doesn't prevent somebody from serving, technically, an unlimited number of terms if they take enough breaks in service. We think the existing charter provision might not work the way most people think it does, and we're not sure voters understood that when they were voting on it. So we think the existing provision should prohibit somebody from serving more than 3 consecutive terms, but it should also consider being amended so that it allows for someone to serve 3 consecutive terms but not serve more than 3 total terms. Somebody can serve 2 consecutive, they can skip a term, come back and serve 2 more, they can come back and serve 3 more, they can skip another term. And I think most of our commissioners just don't see the logic in having a term limit that appears to be one thing when it's really something else. If it's unclear to voters, I think it's fair to put it on the ballot and say, look, this is how it works. If you want to limit somebody to 3 consecutive terms, that's fine. Leave it as it is. But if you really want it to be 3 terms total, it should be amended to say that, and it should be clear.
Lastly, Maryland law doesn't directly address what happens if voters approve 2 conflicting ballot questions. But there seems to be some understanding that they do cancel each other out. Here is Councilmember Will Joando at the June 18th council meeting.
If the current ballot initiative that's being proposed and the signatures are being reviewed make it onto the ballot, and something like this made it onto the ballot and both were to pass, I think in the past that means the status quo would remain. Is that your reading of it?
Yeah, that's correct. That is my reading of it.
That answer to Councilmember Will Joando's question comes from legislative attorney Kandikele Sakoni. That's all for this episode of I Hate Politics, where we aim to stem the decline in local news by working with community voices. Don't forget to tune in to our Tuesday morning news analyses. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, and assistant producer Adama Gay, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Alexandria, Virginia alt rock band Jackie and the Treehorns. Steve Rubin and Pam Long on vocals, guitars, and piano. Frank Caputo on bass and synth, and Brian Gibson on drums. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihbpod.org. I hope you will subscribe, share, and rate the podcast as we bring you stories about politics, close to you and to your home. See you next time.
They gotta keep moving. Give it some time and I'll be front page news. I tell you what, I've got nothing more to lose. I might be too much for you to explain. My own persistence as immortal remains.